What is going on over at Southwest Airlines? We have yet another example of a Southwest Airlines jet getting much too low on short final for an approach 3 or 4 miles short of the runway, apparently lining up on something visually other than the runway. Let's check it out. Here on the Aviation Herald, this latest incident occurred on July 14th. A Southwest Airlines Boeing 737-8 MAX registered November 8841 Lima, performing flight as Southwest Flight 425 from Columbus, Ohio to Tampa, Florida, had been holding en route due to weather at Tampa before continuing the approach to Tampa. On final approach to Tampa's runway 10, ambient pressure was stated at 3014 inches by the tower, and the crew was advised of a headwind gain of about 10 knots at low altitude and a bumpy ride. There was weather in the area. The aircraft descended below minimum safe height, and when tower issued a low altitude alert, they leveled off. About 50 seconds, nearly a minute after the low altitude alert, tower queried whether they were planning to go around, which the crew affirmed. The tower canceled the approach clearance and instructed a go-around. The aircraft initiated a go-around from about 370 feet above the ground level, compensated for local ambient pressure. That's ADS-B altitude versus pressure altitude. 370 feet AGL from about 4.2 nautical miles before the end of the runway threshold. In other words, 4 miles away from the end of the runway. The aircraft climbed out safely and diverted to Fort Lauderdale for a safe landing about 40 minutes later. Now, there was some weather in the area, rather typical weather for Florida this time of the year. At the time of the incident, at 22:53Z, they're reporting winds 120 at 9, gusting to 17 knots, 10 statute miles of visibility with light rain and thunderstorms in the area. Few at 1,500, broken at 4,000, cumulonimbus broken at 25,000, lightning all quadrants. So on the initial report, I thought, well, maybe this was a case of a classic wind shear on final situation, but looking at the flight data, it doesn't look to be the case. It looks to be a fairly stabilized approach. So they held at 21,000 feet here for quite some time and then descended on into Tampa, and they descended all the way down to, well, nearly 150 feet on the ADS-B data altitude, 4 miles short of the runway. That's near the final approach fix where they should be at about 1,600 feet. More on that in a minute. But they came down at a nice stabilized rate of just a little over 1,000 feet per minute, up to 1,200 feet per minute. It wasn't a sudden or drastic drop-off, and there was no mention of wind shear on the PIREPs by any of the pilots flying in and out of the airport. Let's listen to that. The runway that they're aiming for is runway 10, the east-west runway here at Tampa, which appears to be just a little over, well, just 6,999 feet. Call it 7,000 feet long. Though it sounds like the crew is electing to do a visual approach into runway 10 with this weather in the area, there is an instrument approach to runway 10. It's the RNAV GPS runway 10 with LPV minimums of 272 feet, which gets you within 250 feet of the surface. That's a localizer performance GPS approach with vertical guidance. If Southwest Airlines has the ability to fly these minimums, it's a very precise approach using the RNAV GPS. And here on the approach, way down here, 3.5 miles plus 1.3 miles, that's 4.7 miles out from the end of the runway. That puts you at about the final approach fix, ZEXI, where you should be at about 1,600 feet. And remember your 3-to-1 rule. 3 miles out, you should be 1,000 feet. 6 miles out, you should be 2,000 feet above the runway elevation for your standard path on into the runway. This comes to us via the You Can See ATC YouTube channel. Be sure and subscribe and support his channel. I spoke to Victor at Vass Aviation. He's out on vacation. He will be covering this, and we'll have his update out today or tomorrow on this incident. So here's how it played out on live ATC.
Hey, Tower, South 425. We're with you for 10.
South 425, Tampa Tower, reported gain of loss 10 knots on final bumpy ride, and continue for runway 10.
Continue for 10. We got you, Southwest 425. Thank you.
Roger, and the wind 120 at 12, gust 20.
So the wind's 120 at 12, gust 20. That's on the surface, and he's reporting there's a plus or minus 10 knot wind shear on final reported by the previous aircraft.
Southwest 425, runway 10, clear to land.
10 clear to land. Thank you, South 425.
South 1256, turn left at November 2 and contact ground point 7. How was your ride on funnel?
All right, November 2.7, Southwest 1256. Actually, 3 miles and in was moderate rain and just a light chop. The bad stuff is probably 5, 6, 7 miles out with the gusts.
Okay, roger that. Thank you.
So he's reporting moderate rain at 3 miles, so that's going to obscure your visibility of the runway the last 3 miles in. This, by the way, is the bridge, the Tampa Bay Bridge here that the aircraft appears to be lining up with.
And Southwest 425, lost alert, check your altitude, Tampa's altimeter 3014.
3014, thank you, Southwest 425.
This is not just an altimeter error. They had the correct altimeter. This is a much more gross error than a simple altimeter error. 150 feet over that bridge where they should have been.
Southwest 425, you planning to go around?
Yeah, we have to go Southwest 425.
South 425, roger, cancel approach clearance. Go around runway 10 for now. You can fly runway heading and climb and maintain 1,600.
1,600. We're going around Southwest 425.
So what were they thinking? That was some 50 seconds after they got that real low altitude alert. Were they just going to try to continue VFR and find their way to the runway, or do a proper go around and start all over again?
Southwest 425, fly your press heading and climb and maintain 3,000.
I maintain 3,000, South 425.
Southwest 425, you can contact departure 119er Point Manor.
929, South 425.
And they ended up diverting to Fort Lauderdale and landing uneventfully. Now, if we take the KML data and download it into Google Earth, we can see the aircraft lining up and descending. It'll be interesting in the investigation as to whether it was the autopilot on or off. I can't tell from this data at this point, but it looks like they line up and drop down very low right over the Courtney Campbell Causeway here at Sunset Point instead of the runway 10 located way over here. Did that 3 miles of heavy rain kind of block their view with the runway? Were they just doing a visual approach? Were they lining up with the causeway instead of the runway itself and not using the RNAV 10 backup instrument approach to help guide them into the runway? This is the third time now that Southwest has had a similar incident like this. Remember back over in Yukon, Oklahoma, where we had the last incident very similar to this at the Will Rogers Airport. They were lining up with this runway here at Will Rogers. What was this? Runway 13, and they had a low altitude problem where it looked like, and many of you pointed out in the comment section, it looked to you as if the aircraft had lined up on this old Highway 4 instead of the actual runway here at Will Rogers while they were hand flying the airplane. You got to use all available instrumentation on board the aircraft to prevent this from happening. If you have a suitable instrument approach for that runway, use that instrument approach. It prevents you from creating problems like this for yourself and descending to the wrong waypoint, the wrong point, the wrong visual cue, or the wrong runway. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.